Hello and welcome to the Old Renewed Teaching the Research paper. My name is Jeff Treppa. I have been teaching at Homewood Flossmoor High School since 1994, and my writing partner John Schmidt has been here for 14 years. When both of us started, it was very clear that the school had a real commitment to all students writing a historical research paper. The department felt, and we felt as well, that it was important for students to go through all of the thinking processes involved in the research paper. That in many ways, the research paper was the culmination of historical thinking, and we could see all of the steps of the historical thought process in not only the research, but in the writing up of its conclusions. Over the years, though, we found that the students really struggled on a lot of those steps that we often take for granted. It's one of those classics of people feeling very strong on the subject, but then trying to convey this material to students at all levels. And we felt very strongly, John and I did, that it was important for every historical student, regardless of the so-called level, honors or academic core or what have you, that it was important for all students to be able to have access to that historical thinking, that was really the driving force of the course. So when we developed the research paper workbook and all of the processes of historical thinking, we really were looking at an old idea but trying to achieve greater clarity. To try to get a situation of equity for all students, that they could all have access to that. What we have developed are a series of steps that essentially emulate that historical thinking process, and the idea being that the students will not only see models of each step, but they'll also have templates to fill out to help them and guide them in having a more clear historical process in what they're doing for the research paper. And it also, of course, allows us as teachers to see each step, help the kids with each part of the thinking process. So it's trying to break it down into discrete steps. We want to emphasize here that our writing process is not just to produce a narrative paper, let me tell you the story of Winston Churchill, but very much it's about historical interpretation. It is deliberately analytic. We are focusing very strongly on causes and effects, really wanting to build students' skills in evaluating and constructing arguments, the kinds of things, of course, that we see play out in all kinds of instruments, be it International Baccalaureate, advanced placement, college tests like ACT, SAT, PARCC, all these kinds of things. We feel very much that those tests are really trying to assess those kinds of skills. We have been very fortunate at Homewood Flossmoor High School to deal with a variety of students from very many diverse backgrounds. And as we developed the steps, we found that we often had to rework the steps to, again, ensure greater equity. So just a sense of what those steps are in our historical thinking and the kinds of materials that we've been developing. You have the 7 steps here. I'm going to take each one in turn, talk a little bit about what we're attempting to do, and then at the end give you a way to find greater information, more materials, that kind of thing that may be helpful. So step one we've described here as topic description and development of historical question. What we're really aiming for with step 1 is for the students to pick a topic, a historical topic, and then to essentially understand the context of that topic, to go out, find out a little bit about their topic, the kinds of things that historians do in general, just become familiar with the topic. Think in terms of certain turning points, time periods, so we work with context, periodization, things like that. Ultimately, we're following very much on the lines of David Hackett Fisher when he argues that historical interpretation really needs to be focused on the historical question, and that question should be open-ended, should be about causes and effect, should be argumentative, and should be sufficiently specific. So Hackett Fisher argues very much about this causes and effect, and we agree. Before you get to the point of dealing with evaluating what happened, before you get to the point of comparing what happened to something else that happened, we feel it's very strongly important. It's quite significant that the students deal with what exactly did happen, what led to what other kinds of developments. So we want them to start definitely in their historical research with a question dealing either with causes and or with effects. We also feel it's important that the students have a question that's open-ended. Was Mr. Treppa a dictator in class or was he a saint? Not a very helpful question. It avoids all kinds of wonderful possibilities about me. Instead, the question would be something like, what kind of impacts did Mr. Treppa have on the history class? And then the students are then able to go more open-mindedly, find information, and form their own answers. But we do want the question to be one that can be answered argumentatively. If it's a very straightforward question about what date did the Declaration of Independence become ratified by the Continental Congress, that's not going to be a very helpful question. You get your answer and you move away, but you really don't have a broader interpretation. So we're looking at these kinds of items. We're also looking at an issue of specificity, which when I show you the examples, I think will give you a feeling for this. But the students are not going to be able to take on all things at all times. Like to talk often about having a focus, having a frame of reference, using analogies like if you're trying to do a history of the classroom, you might focus on one particular person in the classroom, you might focus on a part of the classroom, but you're probably not going to be able to take on the entire classroom all at once in a meaningful way. So here are some samples of good historical questions that would have the kinds of qualities we're talking about. If you look at all three of them, you can see that there's definitely an issue of either cause or effect in each question. You can definitely see that there is a argumentative quality to it in the sense that there's not a real clear-cut answer for which you don't need to do research. There's definitely interpretation going on here. You'll also notice it's open-ended. You notice that second question, for example, it's not asking you, is Napoleon Bonaparte a jerk or a saint? It's giving you a question about how did he actually gain power. An evaluation could come later if you want to do that kind of thing. The other point, though, is this issue of specificity. If you look at these questions, you'll see they're giving you time frames. And that, again, is very important. You've got to be able to focus. Otherwise, you're too much all over the map, and it becomes too confusing to manage adequately in a relatively short paper. So we've seen a variety of questions that are difficult over time. I don't want to spend a great deal of time with these right now. If you want more material of this sort and how to help students, of course, our website will give you more practices and pedagogy that you can use. But just for now, these are all things that we've seen submitted at times in step one, which has allowed us to catch it early, essentially, and help the students. That second item, we get something like that quite a bit, where the students are building in an assumption into the question, so it's not particularly open-ended. How did Hitler's stupidity doom the war effort? We all understand that just asking that question means the kids are only going to go out and look for evidence of Hitler's stupidity, as opposed to how did Hitler affect the German war effort, which then they could still conclude that he was being stupid and that it caused problems. But still, it leaves it more open-ended for more information. So, we have that graphic up there about good historical questions and the four elements that are in there. We play that out quite a bit in many, many contexts within our classrooms. This last one, a little bit tricky, and again, the practices will talk about that, because that last one looks right, but it still makes the assumption that events are leading to the rise of Alexander the Great rather than personal qualities or context. So we'll come back to that later. So here's a sample, a brief sample of the kinds of things that come about. You'll notice not terribly radical stuff. It's a quick write-up of who the Maya were and then the question. Probably we would look at that decline and fall and question the issue of fall. But nevertheless, the question is a good one to start with at the very least. Step two involves finding and evaluating sources. You'll notice with step two that there are really kind of two elements to this. The first is just helping the kids understand how to go and look for sources. Kids very often are kind of stuck on this. They don't really have very much experience with it very often by the time they get to us. And so a lot of times the students are going to do things like either A, go to a library and just pull some things off the shelf and hope that it works, or B, just go on the internet, just type something in, whether it be to Google or what have you, and they just take the first thing that happens. So what we want to do is help them figure out all the different kinds of sources. And we've got lots of materials dealing with where you can go to find materials, databases you can look at, historical journals, how to search effectively on the library, how to search effectively in databases, how to search even on the internet. It is a reality. So we also have materials dealing with how to make a good judgment about what works and what doesn't. And you'll notice the second part of step two does involve that evaluation. If you look at the template, you can see very much there is that section dealing with evaluation that lets us see what the kids are doing with what they've chosen and make some corrections as needed. So again, a close-up here, sort of the top, you get some of that bibliographic information. You can see they're circling where the source is coming from or what kind of a source it is. And at the bottom, you can see there's a quick description of evaluation. We're working more and more with evaluation and helping the kids with that. That's another area that we think is going to pay big dividends with the students as you work on it. But this is enough to move ahead on for step two. Step three is basically going out there and getting to it, getting the information. You'll notice with step three, when we're asking them to do an initial base of note cards, that it has a blank on it for a historical question. It's really important that the kids focus on what their question is. Otherwise, again, they're just lost in all of this material as they read books, as they look over notebooks, or journal articles or what have you. They need to have a clear sense of what the historical question is. Now, it may be as they go through the information that they ultimately conclude that they need to make an adjustment to their historical question. And that's fine. That's part of what the benefit is of going step by step by step. If they see information that's dealing with a slightly different question than they were expecting, but they think it's a good thing to explore, they can pursue it. If you look at each individual note card, you'll notice that we have some bibliographic information there. We have a section for the note itself. We do recommend the kids put down exact wording so that later on when they're writing the paper, they can choose to either use the exact wording and do correct citation for that, or they could paraphrase it. But if they take the notes in paraphrase form, then they would have to look the source back up again if they decided they wanted to use exact writing, or quotations. So that's a tricky part, something that's important to emphasize to the kids. You'll also notice on these cards there is an issue of possible topics. This is because we want them, as they're going, we want them to start thinking about what kinds of answers to their question are there? What kinds of answers might they be able to support? So you'll notice here it says, why did the Maya civilization decline and fall? There's that question again. And then they have a variety of sources. If you look at Lamonic's article, Secrets of the Maya, in the upper left there, you can see that the note talks about T. Patrick Colbert, and it's giving you a direct quotation at the bottom of that note card talking about how high the population density is in this particular region. And so one of the possible claims, or one of the possible answers to that question occurs to the kid that it maybe overpopulation has something to do with the decline of Maya civilization. So he or she puts it down next to possible topics, right? It's not a guarantee, it doesn't have to be that, but it's a possibility. And then as you look at the other three cards, you can see overpopulation doesn't show up again on these cards, but there are some things that could connect. Water shortages, deforestation, maybe those things could connect. That'll help the kids put together analytic theses. So it's a good thing to be doing just as they're taking the note cards. Step 4 is where a lot of intense historical thinking occurs. This is the section dealing with establishing claims. We want the kids to get to the point where they are creating original argument. Granted, a lot of high school students dealing with mostly secondary sources are going to have a hard time very often coming up with truly unique and original thoughts. And some of you and some of us, for that matter, really encourage the kids to work with primary sources as well. But it is important to get a sense of the historiography and the secondary sources. When they get to step 4, what they're doing is they're looking at possible answers to their question. So once again, you see the template here has a space for the historical question. Maybe they've modified it by this point, maybe they haven't, but they need to think about what the question is, and then how does their evidence help them answer that question. So now we're dealing with the issue of categorization. How does the evidence fit together? Okay. They've looked at periodization and context. They've formed an analytic question. They've gone out, found sources, evaluated the quality of sources, gathered some initial evidence. Now they're looking at what do they think they have. So there are 3 elements to the historical argument we think are important. You can see them on the screen in front of you there. Claims, what are your answers? And then logic and evidence. So what are your answers? What evidence do you have that backs that up? And then the logic, general reasoning that links the claim to the evidence. Many of you will be familiar with the idea of claim data warrant that comes to us from all kinds of sources. But that claim data warrant part is definitely something that's crucial to building the argument. So here's the template again. And you can see that in this case, the student has come up with 3 basic answers, but some of those answers are combinations of things. The student put down overpopulation on the note card, but they do see overpopulation linked to drought, that those 2 things they do see as being connected. You can see at the explanation there, we'll make it she in this case, she is basically saying, look, the Maya are so successful that they have too many people, and then when drought occurs, they're in trouble. That combination is devastating. That's really nice. It's a nice analytic piece, seeing not only that this is an answer to the question, but kind of linking, not kind of, it is linking those 2 answers together. So it's a really nice piece. The other 2, fighting over scarce resources, loss of confidence, all of which you can see has some evidence. Now, sometimes you'll notice that the evidence may be a little more sparse than you like. Column 2, for example, you'll notice there are only 3 note cards. Maybe it's a good indication there's not quite enough evidence for this. Maybe not, but at least the question arises there. The student will have the ability to think about, do they have enough evidence, and have they really thought through how this all links together? So the thesis then comes out, and of course it's a thing of beauty. Why did the Maya civilization decline and fall? And then you can see what the student did with it. She's got her 3 claims coming, you may remember, from those 3 answers on her Step 4 template. And her claim is overpopulation during drought, leading to increased violence among city-states, both of which leading to loss of faith in their political systems brought on the collapse. Really a nice piece, because what she's recognized is that these 3 claims that she has on the top are in fact linked to each other. And that's yet a whole nother level of analysis that is really quite impressive. And again, that step template helps the student do that quite well. So step 5 essentially then takes that step 4 in the note cards and what have you and says, all right, let's start playing this out. Go ahead, try to get it into the structure of what the research paper would look like, so they can kind of see where gaps are, where strengths are, where they may need to expand or contract pieces. More practices on that later. And then step 6 and step 7 are the rough and final draft. We tend to use Turnitin because it allows us to make a lot of commentary. It allows us to do plagiarism checks and things like that. There's no necessarily any need for that particularly. That's not your call. But step 6, the rough draft, and then step 7, the final draft, are right there. And the other nice piece about this is, having done all the historical thinking and the building of arguments all the way through the draft outline, is when they get to the writing of it, they can focus on the writing of it, focus on the mechanics, focus on the flow, focus on proper citation, those kinds of things they can focus on, because a lot of the other work they've already done. Now it's thinking about how to communicate it effectively. Again, our big idea is we want the students to really go through historical analysis, but since that's so difficult for so many students, it's crucially important that there be very clear instruction. And we believe that by dividing it into the steps and giving them great feedback along every step, models of what they're being asked to do, descriptions, templates to fill out, teacher feedback, in other words, professional feedback from us as well as from you, this is what's going to create equity of opportunity for the students, which absolutely is crucial at this point. If we just have kids memorizing a bunch of information and they don't understand the significance of it, we haven't really done our jobs. So we very much feel like historical analysis is the name of the game. That's it for the moment. We've got a relatively short presentation. Hopefully you found that helpful. If you're interested in more materials to see how this looks in the classroom, the kinds of practices and things of that sort that the students might be interested in, and or if you're interested in seeing the research workbook either in its earlier form or in the updated form that John and I are currently working on, feel free either to contact me or to contact John at the emails that you see on that screen. And short of contacting us directly by email, you can also go to that website, www.historicalthinker.com, which has some initial materials that very well may be helpful. Thanks very much.